Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Really glad to be here. My name is Scott Van Brunt. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Crew. And just by way of quick introduction, Crew is an employee mobility and communication platform specifically designed for frontline teams. So we help organizations across a wide range of industries keep their frontline teams better informed, engaged, and productive through an employee mobility solution. And joined today by Bob Clements. He is president of Axsium Group, and I will let Bob introduce himself.
Thanks, Scott. As Scott said, I'm Bob Clements. I'm the president of Axsium Group. Axsium is a global workforce management consulting firm, and our job is to help make your frontline workforce more productive. So, Scott, why don't we get into it?
All right. Well, I will go ahead and share my screen, but really excited to be covering today's session, which is all around employee mobility. And I know a topic that you and I are both super passionate and super excited about.
Absolutely.
So maybe we can start the conversation today, Bob, with this set of stats, which I find to be very telling and somewhat frankly jarring, which is while frontline or deskless workers make up about 80% of the workforce globally, when we look at where funding goes in terms of enterprise software, only about 1% of that funding actually goes towards software specifically designed for these teams. And so we have this fairly large disconnect where a huge swath of the workforce is receiving fairly de minimis amount of investment in terms of technology to help them succeed at work. And so, Bob, would just love your sort of perspective on this data and sort of what it tells you.
Yeah, jarring is the right word for it, right? And I think that there's a couple of things that jump out at me or I think about when I look at these numbers. And first is, I suspect that for many organizations, there's this cost perception that if we're spending so much on our financial system or we're spending so much on these systems that help that 20%, how much more would it cost for us to deploy an enterprise system that affects the other 80%? And I think the reality is that it's less than most people think. I think that we start to scale costs at that point. And more importantly, I think we're missing out on a huge opportunity to improve the productivity and drive benefit with the deskless workforce.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when we think about what the actual cost is or that missed opportunity, we typically start with this picture, which is every time we share it with a customer or prospective customer, we get a bit of an audible chuckle, and I think frankly it hits very close to home for most. And that is every retail establishment or restaurant or manufacturing facility probably has some break room or back office location that looks something like this, where you have a bulletin board and frankly really important information being posted here, starting with the schedule, training information, safety information. But it's probably being it's a fairly dated and ineffectual way to get this information communicated. And so Bob, would just love your sort of reaction when you see this and whether it resonates from your experience.
Yeah, my reaction is, ugh. I hated the break room when I was in the frontline workforce, and going into my clients' break rooms today, I always have that same cringing reaction because the information that's being presented here is just so overwhelming. As a worker, when I come in, what am I looking at and why do I care? And my experience is so much of the information contained on those bulletin boards are out of date. And by the way, if it gets updated, nobody's going to know because the form looks exactly like the last one that was up there. And so for many employees, the bulletin boards and the clutter of paper really just become white noise.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and that's why we also call out the mobile phone on the table. And what we typically see is that your employees, if what they're being presented with from their company is basically this analog bulletin board approach, they're going to go look for alternate solutions, and that typically starts with the mobile device that every single one of them has in their pocket. And so, just curious what you see as it relates to how employees are perhaps sort of skirting the system or augmenting in their own ways.
Yeah, that mobile phone sitting there makes me think of a couple of things. First of all, it is that shadow IT, right? That if you don't provide a technical solution for your workforce, they're going to find one for themselves to make their lives easier. And that means that you've lost control of that data, you've lost control of that interaction. And, frankly, you're not serving your employee to the extent you could. I also think, and it's interesting when I look at that phone sitting there, I think the person who left it there is probably someplace else in the building panicking that their phone isn't with them. It's like this visceral response. The reality is mobile phones are ubiquitous. So, every employee has one these days, and it's a great opportunity to make the information in your communication fresh.
For sure. And obviously the undercurrent or the context that we're having the conversation in today is a global pandemic. And what we know is that, as it relates to communication, as it relates to getting information down to every single team member in your organization, it's never been more important to get that right. And it's never been, frankly, more costly to get it wrong. So Bob, just curious, for conversations you're having with your clients, how has the pandemic perhaps changed their calculus around investment here, or has it sort of shown a brighter light on this need?
Well, it really has shown the need to be able to communicate with your entire workforce and to do that virtually in real time. When the pandemic shut down the economy and shut down non-essential workers, for us, it meant that we stopped traveling, and I could send an email to all my consultants and they knew what was going on. But many of my customers had no way of reaching out to the hourly workforce, whether they were at their facility or whether they were at home. And so most of my customers today see a great need to be able to have that instant communication. And that communication isn't just about me broadcasting something to you. It's about creating a bi-directional communication, especially at a time like this where employees are scared. They're scared for themselves. They're scared for their families. They're nervous about coming to work because they don't know what health challenges that might present. You need to be able to have a two-way street from a communication and be able to talk to them wherever they are, whether that's at home or at work or someplace else.
Yeah, and I cherry picked this quote from Andrew Martell, who leads the employee mobility practice there at Axsium for you, and maybe Bob, you could speak to it of and you were a bit, but it really seems that a lot of the challenges that folks are facing, they can be addressed through some version of employee mobility, and that if folks were perhaps delaying investments in this area, there's just a greater realization that now might be the time.
Absolutely, now is the time. I mean, it's the time because COVID's not over, and we're going to continue to have a need to stay connected to our workforce. And it's truly vitally important. And even when a vaccine is available or COVID just goes away, that need for that instant, personal, and targeted communication isn't going to go away. And failing to invest now puts you on your back foot. Failing to invest now means that you're going to continue to limp along with poor communication and put yourself at risk for the next thing that happens, whether it's at a local level or whether it's at a kind of a nationwide or a global level.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, the next hurricane, the next natural disaster, the next time that you need to get in touch with people in real time is just around the corner, whether it's as you said, local or global. So we totally agree. And so if now is the time to invest, maybe we can just break it down a little bit more tactically. What do we mean when we think of an employee mobility solution, and what are the components of that? And at least for us at Crew, we tend to frame it in this way, really thinking about sort of 5 key components or modules of a solution. And for us, it really starts with what we've been talking a lot about, which is communication. We think about communication as the first sort of building block, and that's both for 2 reasons. One is that it is often the sort of quickest module to get out there, and secondly, it is really a building block. So every other piece of functionality is going to have a communication aspect to it, and so having that really robust communication in place is sort of foundational to other elements. Then we think about the 4 others that go around it, and that starts with scheduling and shift coverage, right? So the ability to access your schedule, see when you work, see when there are open shifts, and if I need to get a shift covered, be able to do that. And then it's recognition and culture. So being able to build a team, to build team camaraderie, have a place to gather digitally to recognize great work. And then two other components that we think are taking on, increased importance in the pandemic is around training and learning. Obviously, tons of new procedures, policies, things that employees need to learn, and then task management. How do you know, that tasks are getting done? Who's the right employee to complete a task, and do you have the systems in place to make sure there's transparency and accountability to drive that home? But Bob, we'd love just your perspective on this, which is are these the same modules that you think about, and how would you think about again maybe stack ranking them or ordering them or phasing them in for a company who decides now is the time for an employee mobility solution in their organization?
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with you that comms is kind of the foundation. It's the starting point, but comms by itself sometimes doesn't lack the stickiness on day one. Employees aren't used to communicating through that device with work. And so it really is about what else can you tack on. And that changes a little bit from organization to organization. What we've found historically is that scheduling really provides that stickiness. You put somebody's schedule on their phone, employees are using Facebook or WhatsApp for that anyway. So let's get it onto a company app where you have the data. Scheduling often provides that stickiness. And so that's often the first place I look. In the pandemic today, task management and learning and training have taken on a whole new importance, just given, as you mentioned, the fact that work is changing. The things that I do every day are changing. And the order and frequency in which I do things may need to change as well. And that's why learning and tasks become so important. To me, recognition and culture is really icing on the cake. It is what turns the app into something that it's almost gamifies it, and it keeps people engaged and keeps them coming back for more. So I think you could order those things, but ultimately, I think this is a really good list. It's very strong, and it's what we see our customers focused on as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think from our perspective, we do see when you're able to put all these together in one single place, and it truly becomes that sort of digital hub for the team member, where every piece of their job and every bit of workflow they touch is in one place. That's where it really starts to sing, and it starts to have the stickiness that you talked about, Bob.
Yep.
So coming back to sort of data, and I think one positive signal and piece of data that we've seen is when we surveyed companies and leaders in Q2 of this year over the summer, what we saw was that 57% of surveyed companies said that they were actually increasing investment in this type of frontline employee technology. And that's obviously a great signal from where we started with these type of solutions getting only 1% of the pie. And when we broke that out and said, okay, where actually is that investment happening? What we saw was the biggest sliver was going towards communication, collaboration, and sort of digital workplace tools, which is great. And that's a lot of what we talked about today. And then the next two pieces were around things like we talked about training and learning management, as well as WFM and scheduling tools. And so, Bob, would just love your viewpoint on this data. What stands out to you? What surprises you? And anything that you think is particularly noteworthy?
Well, yeah, a couple of things. One is I'm not surprised to see that there are a majority of people investing in this right now. I think that many or most organizations recognize the importance of communication and recognize that mobile can be a kind of the spearhead for that. I am a little bit surprised that learning and training aren't taking on a little bit higher percentage of the implementations right now. But that may just be because mobile learning is relatively new. It's something that it requires a rethinking about the way that we train. And so maybe that 32% really just represents that we're on the beginning of a new way of learning and development.
Yeah, I think that's right. Kind of that building block approach. Well, great. So, if now's the time and we're seeing companies move there, let's talk a little bit about ROI, payback periods, and what really is the pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. As we think about it, and have experienced it with our customers, what we see is that the payback typically shows up in a variety of manners and a variety of metrics. It certainly moves the needle on key metrics that we know our customers care about, starting with things like employee turnover, right? So building that better digital employee experience makes people more connected to their job, more likely to stick around. We know that it has huge implications in terms of manager time savings. offloading some of those low value, more administrative tasks. You can just think about getting an open shift filled rather than a manager spending, the better part of 1 or 2 hours calling down a list of employees to find someone. Now you've made that self-serve, self-directed by the employees. The manager still has control to approve who can cover someone else's shift, but we've really streamlined and automated a lot of that. And what we see is that it as you start to move the needle on some of these metrics, it also shows up in the the KPIs that the business really cares about, whether that's customer satisfaction, whether that's upsell revenue. When our frontline teams are more engaged, when they know better what to do, when they have greater accountability and transparency around those activities, it really starts to move the needle on those key metrics. So that's kind of where we see it show up. And in terms of the time to value and the payback, our experience is that our customers typically see a positive ROI on their investment in their employee mobility solution in 3 to 6 months. Typically always under 6 months, and it really starts to pay back right in that 3 to 6 month time period. But Bob, would love your, as you've worked with many customers, I'd love your experience here. Does this jive with what you're seeing? And is this the same sort of framework and lens through which you look at it?
It definitely resonates with me. We see a very similar payback time, and it happens just as fast for big companies and small companies. There's just a lot of value here. And in terms of the benefits that you have on the left side of the screen here, we see the same thing. And, on that topic of lower employee turnover, I would also probably add lower employee turnover costs. So when a turnover does happen, or when you're hiring more staff, ultimately this type of solution also helps kind of grease the skids for new employees, because they can onboard faster, they can get training faster and more on demand. Ultimately, you can make people productive faster because the tool to do so is in the palm of their hand.
Yeah, and I think that that definitely resonates, and I think it's also qualitatively different, right? So I think when we have this sort of digital hub where people come together, what it means to be a new employee on day one, and to have this team, the ability to communicate with folks and to know what to do, that just feels qualitatively different, which also leads to faster time to productivity.
Yeah, everybody wants to be the employer of choice, right? And you provide better technology, and employees love it.
That's right. Particularly, obviously, like the millennials who make up that increasing share of the workforce, and the younger folks. Well, awesome. So Bob, I think that largely brings us to the end of our time today. I obviously want to thank everyone for joining us. Bob, thank you for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation. I do want to call out that in addition to the Q&A here today, if folks are interested in continuing the conversation, want to learn more, please certainly feel free to reach out. I'm Scott at crewapp.com. You can get me there. And then Bob is bclements@axiomgroup.com. And certainly both happy to continue the conversation and hear from you all what questions you have and how we can help. Bob, thanks again.
Thank you.